In the scene you just witnessed, that lone American soldier would end up forcing 250 men and 6 German tanks to retreat. It might seem like an exaggeration made for the movies. If we appeal to logic, there's no possibility that this could have happened. But what if I told you it did happen? And furthermore, that the protagonist of that scene was also the protagonist of those actions on the battlefield. In France in 1945, this man achieved such a feat, which would lead him to receive more medals than any other soldier, ally or enemy, and all before turning 21. Today, in this new episode of Military History, we'll tell you all about the heroic Audie Murphy, the most decorated soldier of the entire Second World War. Audie Murphy was born in a small town in Texas, United States, on June 22, 1925, into a very poor family. He was 10 years old when his father left home, leaving him, his mother, and his 11 siblings without financial support. He was forced to drop out of school to work in a cotton mill for $1 a day. By the time World War II broke out, at just 16 years old, his mother died of pneumonia. Several of his siblings were taken to orphanages, and he took care of those who remained. The family situation was so dire that he had to learn to hunt to obtain food. Little did he know, the skill Murphy acquired with the weapon would prove very useful in just a few years. After Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, which marked the United States' entry into the war, 17-year-old Murphy attempted to enlist in the Marine Corps. However, his height of 5 feet 5 inches was not sufficient for acceptance. The same thing happened in the Air Force. The Army remained his only option, but he was also rejected here, this time for being underage. This did not deter him. With the help of one of his sisters, he presented falsified documentation that made him appear old enough, and finally his entry was approved. Due to his small stature and youthful appearance, he was nicknamed Baby by his comrades in arms, but Murphy would soon demonstrate how erroneous it is to judge by appearances. He was assigned to the 15th Army Infantry Division's 3rd Division, which was stationed in North Africa. There he remained with his division until 1943, when he saw combat for the first time in Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Sicily. In that place, Murphy served as a runner, delivering messages to and from the front lines. This role did not prevent him from impressing his superiors with his skill with weapons and quick mind. It was on Italian soil where his extensive record of decorations would begin. At Salerno, he charged with only one companion against a German machine gun nest, killing its 5 enemies. A few weeks later, he led a small group of men in repelling a German attack. The high number of Allied casualties on the front lines meant that soldiers who stood out were quickly promoted. By December 1943, he was already a sergeant. Throughout his military career, Murphy was a constant victim of illnesses. For example, an outbreak of malaria prevented him from being in the initial landing that would begin the Battle of Anzio. This amphibious operation marked the beginning of one of the bloodiest campaigns on the Mediterranean front. Logistic errors, such as the few men employed and the absence of tanks, greatly complicated the achievement of planned objectives. The costly victory the Allies achieved paved the way to Rome, undermining the German occupation in the country. Both the Allies and the Axis forces suffered over 40,000 casualties, including dead and wounded. Let's now hear the testimony of a veteran who recalls what this forgotten battlefield was like.
You run out onto the beach, and we ran into deep water. Whereas you run into water up to your knees, and we ran into water and it went up to here. So you're getting panicking, throwing equipment about. And anyway, finally you get ashore, you're being fired at now, you see. If the bloke up there with a machine gun does a bit of spraying on you, you're likely to catch one. You get down as quick as you can and get off the beach. That was the first shooting I ever come across.
Barely recovered, Murphy returned to the fight, and after his first battle upon his return, he was promoted to staff sergeant. With the help of his platoon, he eliminated a tank crew and then blew it up with grenades. Shortly after, he successfully repelled a German attack. He was awarded the Bronze Star for his actions, the first of what would be an extensive record. A second bout of malaria put him in the hospital, but Murphy never stopped wanting to be on the front lines. The idea of asking for discharge never crossed his mind. Once recovered, he participated in August 1944 in Operation Dragoon, the lesser-known Allied amphibious invasion of France, carried out in the south of the country. In the early days of the attack, he killed 2 snipers and eliminated another machine gun nest himself, earning him the Distinguished Service Cross as a result. But his achievements were just beginning. In September, he was wounded in combat for the first time by a mortar explosion that injured his ankle, thus earning a Purple Heart. In October 1944, while fighting in the Lommel Quarry, Murphy achieved the incredible feat of winning 2 Silver Stars in 3 days. The first came when he faced a Nazi machine gun position, firing at his platoon. He killed 4 Germans and captured another 3. 3 days later, Murphy and his platoon were ambushed by their enemies and began to suffer casualties rapidly. While his comrades took cover, he crawled through the mud to a good position, eliminated 2 snipers, and then radioed mortar artillery fire. The skirmish lasted over an hour and ended with 15 Germans dead and 35 wounded. For the bravery and leadership shown in adversity, he received a battlefield promotion. Murphy was promoted to second lieutenant at just 19 years old. 2 weeks later, he would receive a second wound that almost took him out of action. Deep in France, Murphy's platoon was attacked by German snipers. Guided by their brave leader, they managed to capture 2 enemies, but a hidden shooter managed to hit Murphy in the hip. Nevertheless, he killed his attacker with a shot between the eyes. The wound didn't seem very serious at first, but soon developed gangrene. Let's hear the testimony of one of his comrades.
He wasn't bleeding very bad, and he was prodding his prisoners along, and he was making them carry the radio with him. And I said, "Murphy, I hope you can stay back. Good luck to you." And he's got a grin that gets you, grin, and a happy grin, a baby-faced grin. And I really didn't expect him to see him again.
For a month, Murphy couldn't return to the front. But when he did, he performed his greatest feat, one of the most outstanding of the entire war. On January 14th, 1945, he rejoined his division. They were in the French town of Colmar, very close to the German border. For months, this region had been in Nazi hands, so their presence was strong. If they could drive the Germans out of here, the path to Berlin would be one step closer. Their target was the village of Holzwihr, where the Germans were entrenched. For 10 days, Murphy's company fought against Axis forces, inching closer step by step to the small village and suffering continuous casualties. By January 24th, of the over 100 men who had set out for Colmar, only 40 remained fit to fight. All the officers except Murphy had fallen. A strong German counterattack that same day wounded him in both legs, but he was not evacuated and the enemy was repelled. While waiting for reinforcements on January 26th, he was appointed commander not only of the platoon, but of the entire company. Even in the adverse conditions his division faced, he was ordered by his superiors to hold the line north of Holzwihr. The ground was so frozen that trenches could not be dug, and he was informed that there would be no reinforcements available. He had 40 men, 5 armored vehicles, and 2 M10 Wolverine tank destroyers. For anyone, this would be an almost impossible scenario, but Murphy was not deterred. He set up his command post in a trench near one of the tank destroyers, from where he could control the battlefield and awaited the arrival of his enemies. What happened next would go down in history as one of the most impressive individual military feats ever performed. Even to this day, it remains one of the greatest displays of willpower, courage, and heroism seen on the battlefield. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon on January 26th, the German attack began. It was preceded by artillery bombardment. After this, 6 tanks and 250 men dressed in white emerged from the village, heading towards the Americans. The tank destroyers immediately began firing upon seeing the enemy, but their projectiles bounced off the German armor without causing damage. The situation worsened when one of the German vehicles hit one of the American Wolverines head-on, killing its crew and rendering it useless. The other tank destroyer managed to hold off the enemy advance for a while, killing several men with its mounted machine guns, but a misstep caused it to get stuck in one of the trenches dug, with no firing angle. Murphy saw that the situation was desperate. With the vehicles out of action, his men had no chance of holding off the German attack. He ordered his soldiers to fall back to a safer position within the forest. Meanwhile, he would stay at his command post, directing Allied artillery via his radio. Despite the discontent of his comrades in arms, they obeyed. Let's hear the testimony of a historian who speaks about how Murphy thought and reacted.
He simply reacted on adrenaline and gut reactions of attacking, aggressive action. He took it. He picks up grenades. He finishes off the Germans. He grabs a German machine gun. He continues to fire on the Germans that are still on the hill. And in the process, he secures the position virtually single-handed.
Murphy fired and fired upon the German troops, while bullets and projectiles flew over his head. When the ammunition in his carbine ran out, he realized he could no longer do anything and that he had to fall back. But at that moment, his eyes fell upon the destroyed tank destroyer. Although the vehicle was impossible to operate, the .50 caliber turret was still functioning. With that, Murphy could hold off the Nazi advance. However, there were disadvantages. He would be an easy target for tanks. Furthermore, the tank destroyer was on fire, and if the flames reached the fuel or ammunition, the vehicle would explode. Despite the danger, Murphy decided that the risk was worth it. With the courage that characterized him, he climbed onto the tank destroyer and began to machine gun the Germans. Those in the open field were quickly swept away, and the others were forced to take cover. The German tanks added their fire to that of the infantry, but miraculously they failed to hit the vehicle. The smoke coming from the tank destroyer had the effect of hiding its position. This, coupled with the overwhelming sound of artillery and gunfire, made it difficult for the Germans to identify where the machine gun fire was coming from. Even when 2 artillery shells hit so close to the vehicle that they caused him a concussion and reopened the wounds in his legs from the previous day, Murphy didn't stop firing. For an hour, he kept the trigger squeezed, while the Germans kept advancing despite their casualties. But Murphy's luck persisted. The sky, cloudy since the attack began to clear. This made it possible for the Allied bomber planes stationed nearby to be prepared to assist the brave soldier. When notified by radio, Murphy marked the position of the enemy troops with smoke grenades. Even when the Nazi soldiers were dangerously close, he continued instructing the planes to fire, risking being hit himself. Assailed from the air by the bombs of the planes and swept by machine gun fire, the German infantry began to retreat. The tanks, without support, followed suit shortly after. At that moment, the radio through which Murphy had commanded the artillery stopped working. Exhausted and bleeding from his wounds, but with his mission accomplished, he got off the tank and began to walk towards his comrades. Barely reaching the forest, he heard the vehicle explode. He had been saved by mere seconds. After such a feat, any soldier could take a break without a trace of guilt. But Audie Murphy was not just any soldier. He refused to be evacuated for his wounds, and instead immediately organized a counterattack. On January 27th, one day after Murphy's heroic actions, the town of Holzwihr was in American hands. By the 28th, the entire Colmar area was free of Germans. In February, Murphy was promoted to first lieutenant and awarded the Legion of Merit for his actions in the Mediterranean and European campaigns. Thanks to his new rank, he was transferred from the front lines to regimental headquarters and did not return to combat, perhaps much to his regret. In June 1945, with the war in Europe now over, he was awarded the Medal of Honor for his heroic actions on the outskirts of Holzwihr on that fateful January 26th. The official citation reads, "Lieutenant Murphy's indomitable courage and refusal to yield a single inch of ground saved his company from possible encirclement and destruction, enabling them to hold their position in the forest." In addition to the Medal of Honor, Murphy was awarded 2 Bronze Stars, the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, the Legion of Merit, and 3 Purple Hearts. Beyond his country's awards, Murphy received the Legion of Honor and 2 War Crosses from the French Army and a War Cross from the Belgian Army. Audie Murphy thus became the most decorated soldier of the entire Second World War and of United States history, with 241 confirmed kills and dozens of captured prisoners. As incredible as it may seem, he was only 20 years old. Let's listen to him speaking about the end of the war.
When you heard the war was over, what was your first thought or reaction?
Well, coming home again, I started to think about home for a change, which we didn't dare think of before because, as you know, you live from day to day, minute to minute in most cases. And suddenly I was a little frightened. Strange as it might seem, I didn't know what I'd do when I got home, and I suddenly felt just a little empty inside and a little lonely about the whole thing. Although I was very happy the war was over, I suddenly didn't feel that I had a home.
After the war, Murphy returned to Texas, but his adventures wouldn't end there. In 1945, he was invited to Hollywood, where just a few years later, he would begin a film career almost as impressive as his medal count. He appeared in over 40 movies, mostly war films and westerns, often starring in them. He even played the lead role in To Hell and Back, where he portrayed himself during his battles in France, as we saw at the beginning of the video. This movie became the biggest success of Universal Studios at the time of its release. He balanced his acting career with a second, thankfully quieter military career. He joined the Texas Army National Guard, where he trained troops destined for the Korean War. Although Murphy sought to be transferred to the fight, his division was never deployed. But the battles and tragedies endured also took their toll. In his post-war life, Murphy suffered from insomnia and depressive episodes. He revealed that the only way he could sleep soundly was with a loaded pistol under his pillow. He also experienced abrupt mood swings. According to his wife, once while watching news of German orphans on television, he cried out of guilt. He was also involved in several violent altercations, nearly ending his opponent's life on one occasion. In the 1960s, he developed an addiction to Placidil, a sedative that alleviated his nightmares. But being Murphy, he locked himself in a hotel room alone to overcome his dependency. He succeeded. Throughout his life, he was an advocate for the rights of veterans of the Korean and Vietnam Wars, raising awareness about what soldiers suffered on the front lines. He never hesitated to speak about his own post-traumatic stress, then known as battle fatigue. He urged the government to pay more attention and allocate more resources to studying the effects of war on soldiers' health. As was customary in his life, he succeeded. On May 28, 1971, Murphy died when the private plane he was flying in with 5 other people crashed into a mountain. He was 46 years old. His birthday is known in Texas as Audie Murphy Day. Currently, Murphy remains an example for any soldier of the United States. His courage, leadership, and ability to face adversity are an inspiration to military personnel in every corner of the world. Below, we can see former U.S. President Barack Obama remembering Murphy at a Medal of Honor ceremony.
You lived up to the standards of the most decorated American soldier of World War II, Audie Murphy, who famously repelled an overwhelming enemy attack by himself for one simple reason: they were killing my friends.
We're reaching the end of the video, and we'd like to ask you, what aspect of Audie Murphy's story surprises you the most? Leave your response in the comments section below, and make sure to subscribe to our channel to stay updated on more military events that have left a mark on history.